All right, we're going to get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caitlin Porter, and I am an advisor for the Reading, Advising, and Mentoring program. I want to welcome you all to our first generation graduate student panel. We are so excited for you all to hear about the grad school experience from this awesome group of panelists. Before we begin,
Once
I
again, a
do
Zoom
want
meeting for
to.
work.
There we go. Before we begin, I do want to mention that we will be recording this meeting and we will be putting it on RAMP's YouTube channel if you'd like to go back and review what we've discussed here today. So we'll now start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land each of us live, learn, and thrive on are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. Cal Poly Pomona is on the original homelands of the Gabrielino Tongva tribal nations. We acknowledge the genocide and systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands, and we honor and respect the diverse and beautiful peoples still connected to this land. So now I will turn over the spotlight to our moderator, Angelina Mason, who will introduce herself and facilitate the rest of the event.
Hi everyone, my name is Angelina. I am a tutor at RAMP and a fourth year communications and ethnic studies student. So we're just gonna jump right into it. I'm gonna have everybody introduce themselves and then we'll move on to the questions. For anybody in the audience that has any questions at the end, there'll be a general Q&A. So I ask that you hold your questions until we get to that part. So for introductions, we're just going to say our name, graduate program and university, and what year you are. And Evelyn, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Evelyn. I am a first-year master's student in the biomedical science program at UC Riverside School of Medicine.
Awesome. Valerie?
Hi, my name is Valerie. This is my third but last year at Cal Poly Pomona. I'm a kinesiology major, and starting fall, I'm starting USC's occupational therapy doctorate program.
Cool. Jacqueline?
Hi everyone, my name is Jacqueline Naranjo. I'm currently a staff member here at Cal Poly Pomona within the Office of Student Success. I completed my master's in equity, education, and social justice at CSU Long Beach. I'm also currently a doctoral student at Long Beach in the educational leadership program.
That's awesome. Areli?
Hi everyone, my name is Areli. I will be starting my first year at UC Davis with their doctorate program of DVM, and I'll be the class of 2028 there.
Nice. And Wayne?
Hey, my name is Wayne Page. I am a grad student, or I'm a PhD candidate at The Ohio State University, and this is my fifth year here.
Cool. And last but not least, Jane?
Hi, my name is Jane. I'm currently the lead tutor here at RAMP. I was recently accepted to the Biological Sciences graduate program here at Cal Poly Pomona, and I will be starting in the fall of 2024.
Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves and sharing what you've been up to. That's really awesome. And we're just going to jump into it with the first question. So, Valerie, I'm going to direct this one at you first. Consider your earliest notions of graduate school. What are some of the reasons you decided to apply? Were there any individuals who helped you make your decision?
So for kinesiology, it's unfortunate, but kind of fortunate where you do have to go to like further education once you get your bachelor's because kinesiology is like an umbrella term, and then like everything falls underneath, like whether you want to be like a PT, an OT, an AT. So you do have to go into further education. And I knew that going in. I always wanted to be a PT, but then I switched into OT once I saw the prerequisites. And OT just fit better with me. So, and then like also around because everyone in kinesiology, like everyone is going into graduate school. And so like everyone is kind of supporting each other, or like you'll see familiar faces when you go into like your next classes. Like, oh, and then everyone says, oh, I'm taking this and that for this and that. So it's kind of like comforting to know that I'm not the only one going on to graduate school. And if I have any questions, like everyone else is going through the same path too.
Yeah, I think having a community when you're going off to grad school is really nice. Jane, same question.
So for me, I learned a lot about graduate school through RAMP. I had heard about it in passing in high school, but a lot of the terminology flew over my head at the time because I wasn't quite familiar with the concept. But being a RAMP participant, becoming a RAMP participant from the very beginning of my college career allowed me to learn more about graduate school as the years progressed, like what exactly it was, what it entailed, how to apply. I learned a lot through my coworkers, RAMP staff, and in my sessions with students where I would help them with their grad school applications and preparing and planning as well. In my earlier years of undergrad, I always said I would go to grad school when others asked what my next step was, but I didn't have like a set plan. I actually didn't solidify my decision to go into grad school until my 4th year, transitioning into my 5th year of undergrad. I thought I was just going to go into animal science, get my master's there until I talked to others who were in that program. So I credit 2 people for helping me make my decision for grad school. One was a grad student at the time of the animal science program. He suggested reaching out to a specific professor in the biological sciences department who worked with livestock because he thought it would align more with my interests. And so she also had research projects that aligned with that as well. He spoke very highly of her guidance and her resourcefulness. So I reached out to her, we got to know each other. And so I also credit that professor, Dr. Jellyman, for helping me make my decision as well. So with that grad student pointing me in the direction of the biosciences department and the encouragement of Dr. Jellyman, I applied to grad school. Because with my project, I want to work towards improving the health and well-being of cattle and developing my skills as a researcher.
Yeah, that's great. I think reaching out to professors and leaning on them for support is definitely something that's important in the like graduate school application process. For this next question, I'm going to direct it towards Adeli first. So how did you approach the graduate application process, and how early in advance did you begin preparing? What are some suggestions or strategies that you used that you would like to share with students?
So I was applying to vet school, and the graduate application was the VEMCAS application. I was not familiar with it. None of my family had been through it. I am first gen, and so actually Jane was my tutor at the time, and she helped prepare me a year earlier before I was graduating, making my my portal and my application for the VEMCAS, because that's kind of the website that we have to use to apply to vet school. So I did, in a way, kind of prepare myself 1 year early in advance to when I was actually applying. And so with that, it did help me a lot. It did kind of ease me away. RAMP definitely was a stepping stone for me when it came to applying for grad school. But throughout my time there as well, I had a mentor, and my mentor was my aunt because she went into like PhD and she did her master's. And she was also someone who took accountability of me as well. Every weekend I would be meeting with her, making sure that I was inputting all my information, making sure I was on top of my personal statement as well. Something I will say is that it took me about like 8 to 9 months to write my own personal statement. And then the summer that I was submitting my application, I went to Guatemala for a veterinary internship, and I came back and I completely redid everything. And I only had 1 month left. So just understanding that graduate school and the application is a process itself, and just to be sure that whatever you're submitting, you're really happy with. Because like I said, I wrote my personal statement in like 8 to 9 months, and then I completely like just threw everything away. I was not happy. And I ended up submitting something I was really happy with. So understanding and just being not too hard on yourself, that it is a process. And just having someone who you can have accountability on, making sure that they're also on top of you, because it is a very long and tedious process as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's like never too early to start on your personal statement. You're like going to be constantly revising it the whole time. So definitely like get a head start on it like whenever you can. Jane, can you answer the same question?
So I only applied to one program, which is the Biological Sciences Department here at Cal Poly Pomona, because Dr. Jellyman had agreed to be my mentor. And so I was super grateful for her guidance because so Javier, that grad student, speaking highly of her guidance and her resourcefulness, I really got to see how, she really helped me through that process. So once I decided I was going to grad school, I actually met regularly with her and she helped me with the graduate application process. She gave me a preview of what it would be like to be a grad student in that program. So just like Areli, I'm also a first generation graduate, going to be a graduate student. So no one in my family knew what to do, didn't know how to apply. So I was really like grateful for her help. And so I started preparing as early as a year before I actually submitted my application. I had a timeline based on the deadline. I planned when I was going to ask for letters of recs, giving them enough time to actually write it, get to talk to them about it, update them on what I'm doing, when to write my personal statement, and giving it enough time to revise it. And so, edit, get feedback and revise it, because the more eyes on it, the better. So that's something I really recommend as well. And so some things I really recommend is really researching the grad programs that you're interested in, especially if you're looking into multiple. And when I say really doing it, I mean like reading up on the program on the program's website, touring the school, especially if it's, if you can, if it's out of state or if it's not in your area, getting a feel of the campus, researching who the program coordinator is, any related faculty members or anything, possibly getting in touch with them as well. And I would also say that if, you're in your undergrad and if you're, you have a specific course or specific field that you're interested in, getting in touch with that professor and seeing if they're really, going into any research, any projects or anything like that, because you're showing a genuine interest and you're, you get to know them, their background, and this can help develop a connection with them. And so maybe they could possibly also keep you in mind if any opportunities were to arise.
Yeah, I think reaching out to possible mentors is a really good idea because you already establish a connection. You get to ask them more about their research and they'll be familiar with you. So it's a really good advice. Wayne, for this next question, we'll start with you. Did you apply to grad schools outside of California? And what are some of the challenges and benefits that came from that?
Yeah. Well, obviously I applied to schools out of California since I go to Ohio State. But I applied to most of the schools I applied to were out of state, instead of in state, primarily due to the fact that the area of topic I wanted to go into was a specific area of research interest that a lot of universities don't necessarily research. So I applied out there. So what are some of the benefits behind that? I'll start with that. Well, fortunately for me, you get different kind of financial opportunities for that. So the different universities have different offers, such as getting accepted into one of their programs, but not a financial means of starting, not a guaranteed GRA or GTA, versus one getting a fellowship and as such. So that was kind of the benefits in terms of that, as I got more opportunities across the board to assess. Now that also comes with kind of a wide range of challenges, primarily being the one that you move. I spent a lot of my life in California. I'm used to moving a bit, but typically mostly within California. So moving across state, culturally can be quite different. Ohio is quite a bit different than LA in particular. And so those are some of the challenges that kind of came with that. And then even once you decide, being able to assess that, because you can't go visit these universities, or not normally. I was fortunate enough to come visit Ohio State, which has helped with my decision, but that was on their doing, not necessarily mine. So.
Yeah, applying out of state, I think, is like really a big change. So that's really cool that you're able to do that and you're attending somewhere out of state. Also, you get to experience like different cultures, different things like that. Adeli, could you answer the same question?
Yeah, so I kind of had somewhat of a similar challenge like Wayne. This area of specialty I wanted to go into, the doctorate of veterinary medicine, was not very accessible on like the West Coast. There's really only 2 schools. One is private here in California, and obviously Davis is the only one. So other than Davis, I had to go and look outside of California, and that was a really big challenge of mine because I've always lived in California. Most of my family's here in California. But I did ended up applying to, I believe, like 13 other schools that were outside of California, and one was even in the Caribbean island. So not only did I apply out of state, but I also applied out of the nation onto like a Caribbean island. And some challenges I did see was that the tuition was going to be a lot higher. The cultural shock was going to be really different as well. But the benefit was that I didn't realize when I was applying to these schools that there's things called like WICHE, or where you can also apply for in-state residency. So for example, Washington, Wisconsin, and Missouri, I got accepted to all 3 of those schools as well. And they did notify me that I was able to apply for in-state tuition. So although I would be applying for out-of-state tuition for 1 year, I did have the opportunity to apply for in-state tuition, lowering my costs. But at the end of the day, kind of weighing the pros and cons, UC Davis is like #1, and that was always my dream school. So I did end up going to UC Davis, which was in California. Something I do want to note is that I did recently just visited the school, and although it is in California, the culture shock was definitely still there. Growing up in Orange County and going to school here in LA, there's a lot of big buildings, a lot of big like shopping malls nearby, and Davis is a very close-knit, like small college community, and that was definitely something different for me. So even though you are applying to a school that is inside of California, just also understanding that it's not always going to be the same from where you grew up, and just really being open-minded and taking in every opportunity that there is wherever you end up going to school.
Yeah, I had no idea that you could apply for like in-state tuition. So that's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing to find out. Evelyn, we'll start with you for this next question. What factors do you think are important to consider when selecting your graduate program? And what was your decision-making process if accepted to multiple graduate programs? Were there any factors that influenced your decision?
So when I was choosing a graduate program, honestly, one of the thing that drives me towards UC Riverside's program is because it was more inclined to my career goals. So during undergrad, I always knew I wanted to become a doctor. That was like my main goal. But when my senior year came around, I hadn't taken the MCAT yet. I just didn't know what the process was like applying to med school. And everyone was telling me that it was too late. And like I felt that it was too late and I just couldn't make it anymore. So I went to my counselor and I told her like, I don't want to become a doctor anymore. It's too late for me. And she told me like, it's definitely not. There are programs that are going to help you go to med school and not take a gap year. So there's these things called post-bac programs, and then there's master's programs. So the post-bac program, you go and do a year of medical school preparation. They prepare you for the MCAT, you take extra classes. And then the master's program, it does the same thing, but you add in extra classes so you graduate with a master's degree. And those would help me get into med school, and they were aligned with, again, helping me get into med school, but also just walking me through the process because no one in my family is a doctor. And I just needed that extra help. So I applied to 3 different post-bac programs, and I applied to 4 master's programs. And each of them either had a link to their medical school, had a medical school within the university, or offered a lot of support for med school. That's how I chose my programs. I was accepted into 1 post-bac and 2 master's programs. And the reason I chose a master's program was because financial stability is really important for me. And I knew that regardless of the post-bac or master's program, I would have to take out a loan because FAFSA does not cover after your bachelor's degree. So I needed to make sure that no matter what, even if I failed out of med school and I just never became a doctor, I had a way to pay off my loans. I had a way to be financially stable. And that was more attainable for me with the master's degree. And then that's why I chose to go the master's route instead of the post-bac route. And UC Riverside does not guarantee you admission into their medical school, but I do get to take classes with first-year med students. I get to meet the admissions committee for the medical school. So although it's not like they're for sure going to let you in, you get these connections to the medical school, which was really important to me and like what I wanted for my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think post-bac programs like should be talked about a little bit more. I just applied to graduate school as well, and like I did not know that much about post-bac programs, so I definitely recommend like looking into that as well if you're considering graduate school. Adeli, could you answer the same question?
Yeah, so this was kind of a difficult process for me when I was applying for vet school. Typically it is you don't, it's common for people not to get in their first cycle. It's more common for people to get in their second and third cycle, just because of how competitive and how limited the schools are. Again, I did apply to 14 programs, but I did choose them carefully. And the factors that I considered important was one, the mission and vision of the school themselves. I really wanted to be a part of a school that was that really advocated for diversity, especially because someone who is first generation and someone who is a part of the minority community. Something that was really important to me was ensuring that a school that I was going to go get like a doctorate degree was going to definitely advocate and kind of help me support me as a minority student. And I was really interested in small animal medicine. And so when I was looking at these programs, I wanted to be sure that they had a really good and strong small animal medicine program. And I did this by researching on the program. I did make an Excel sheet that kind of weighed out the pros and cons. Of course, finance was also a factor that played in as well. When it came to my decision making, I did get accepted uh to 12 out of the 14 that I applied to. One, I got accepted, or sorry, I got a waitlisted at Cornell and I got declined at AFU. I did end up getting a scholarship by Washington. They did tell me they wanted to give me a scholarship, but that kind of factored into what influenced my decision. Knowing that I had already got accepted to UC Davis, but Washington wanted to give me a scholarship. The scholarship was $5,000, I believe, and kind of weighing it out, I was like, this was kind of a one-time scholarship. This isn't really going to be something that it was going to kind of alleviate my financial stress for the next 4 years. It is a 4-year program. So also knowing that even though schools are giving you scholarship to attend their program. Davis was my in-state school. It was also my dream school. And they do help a lot with scholarships. So that kind of influenced my decision of where I wanted to go, just because I was really fortunate enough to have multiple schools accept me. So just really taking into consideration the type of program, what kind of mission and vision the school display themselves as, the financial, of course, if they offer scholarship. When I got accepted to Midwestern, which was a private school in Arizona, they did not really have scholarship. So that was going to be something that I had to consider, is if you do apply to private schools, knowing that they probably won't accept FAFSA. Just like Evelyn had mentioned that FAFSA doesn't really help. They do still help out with loans, but some private schools don't take FAFSA loans, and with private schools, you may have to take private loans instead. So those were like the two biggest things that influenced my decision.
Yeah, and I think making an Excel sheet to help like list all like the pros and cons and compare schools is a really great idea too. Valerie, we'll start with you for this next question. Did you or will you attend graduate school directly after completing your undergrad degree? Why or why not? And what do you recommend students do to make themselves more marketable for graduate admissions?
So once I graduate in May, I'm starting in September USC's program. So I am going like right away. And the reason I chose this was because, well, it is kind of like a cultural and familial family thing. My parents do not believe in gap years or like gap semesters. And I was gonna go that route to take a gap semester or a gap year, but then I realized like who I am as a person. I'm pretty lazy, and so I'm like, okay, I might as well just like stay on track. Like I'm already doing this, like might as well like you know, because once I get used, because I got used to 8 a.m. classes, so I'll be fine. But once I get used to sleeping in, I'm done. Like, I am gonna sleep in. So I might as well like keep up the good habit. And that's one reason why I continued. Um, and I also, because I was fortunate enough that I found the two schools I applied to, USC and USA, St. Augustine. They don't require volunteer hours. All the other schools I looked at, they do require volunteer hours up until like 80 hours. And I reached out in the summer to like clinics here in the SoCal, and many were not accepting students anymore. And the ones who were, they were like an hour away for like free work. And I was like, oh, you know, might as well just stay with USC and USA. And so I would recommend start like a year or two early. I didn't do that. I applied in November, and I only started looking at grad schools like June. So start a year early so you can know like the school, like their prerequisites, their requirements, and also to start like a year early on building connections with professors or with other people you know who can give you that letter of recommendation. It's okay to be a goody two shoes in your classes. As long as you get that connection, like even if it's just more than a letter of recommendation, they might ask you to be part of their lab. I know that happened to my friends. They're now they were hoping to get a connection with a professor, and the professor invited them to be part of their lab. So now they have a more stepping stone. So I would say look at your the prerequisites, get connections with professors, and just truly know what's gonna make you happy, and that this is something that you really want to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Definitely make those connections with professors, and give them like a good amount of time to write your letters of recommendation as well. Jane, could you also answer the same question?
Yes, so I am not attending grad school directly after getting my undergrad. So I graduated May 2023, which was last spring. Mostly because I decided to go to grad school a little too late to apply and possibly attend that fall, which would have been fall 2023. So that's why I had that year to kind of prepare and everything. So I believe everything happens for a reason. So I took a gap year. That gave me time to prepare to apply. That gave me time to just, you know, really organize my timeline and everything and just kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. So during that gap year, I worked at Ramp. I continued developing my soft skills. I also met with my mentor every now and then because she would give me little research and little writing assignments to kind of keep me going and keep me accountable because like Valerie, I knew myself as well. I was really saying on myself to stay kind of like in that academic mindset. So I would read articles and I would keep reading stuff about things related to my project and things kind of like preparing with my thesis. So that gap year also helped me to recuperate and to properly prepare for grad school because I knew when I look retrospectively, I knew I would have been burnt out if I had gone straight from undergrad to grad school because I did 5 years of undergrad. So going to another 2 to possibly 3 years, I think I know myself, I would have been burnt out. And yeah, but so to be more marketable for graduate admission, I would strongly recommend gaining relevant experience, you know, getting involved in clubs while you can, getting involved in organizations, taking on leadership roles within those clubs and organizations, participating in research if you can. And what Valerie says rings true, you know, create those connections, reach out to program coordinators, faculty members, you know, anything like that, network and create those connections.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome that you're still able to find ways to like be productive during your gap year and keep yourself in that academic mindset. Jacqueline, this next question, we'll start with you first. Think back to your first term in your graduate program. What stood out to you? And if you faced an obstacle, how did you resolve it?
Sure. So I think probably like any program, your first term is probably going to be the most challenging. And it's usually because you're just learning sort of like the culture, right, of the program, the expectations and adjusting. You know, as with any other, program, I mean, life will be lifing. Things will happen to you, as they did to me. In my first term, in my master's program, for example, you know, I decided to also do a 1-year court interpreting program through UCLA. I was doing 2 programs at once. Don't recommend that. And so that was really challenging for me. You know, I also was experiencing stuff at home. So for example, you know, I found out my mom was, you know, end stage renal failure. And so being the primary caregiver, during my first term in graduate school, and we're working 35 hours a week, right? Because this is pre-Obamacare, there was no health insurance, for folks. And so navigating, hospitals, emergency rooms, being a student, working practically full time, was probably a lot. And it's not ideal, and I don't think that necessarily may be the case for maybe a lot of you, but it may be, right? And so I say this because that also kind of shifts your educational trajectory. And sometimes being first gen, you kind of you know, it may feel like this is a reflection of your abilities as a student, and it's not. And it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with that, right? And one of those things was like, if you're considering doing a master's thesis versus a comprehensive exam, right? I was on track to do a master's thesis, and then all of this stuff happened, right? And I think it took a lot for me to accept that it was okay for me to do a comprehensive exam and not do a thesis. And I wasn't letting anyone down. I wasn't letting myself down or my family down. And that is a lot to deal with, I think, being first gen that we don't talk about. And so, you know, one of the things that I did was really work closely with my faculty, right? Like really having those conversations, and really getting the reassurance, right? That I was doing what was best for me at that time. And I was still getting the most that I could from my graduate program.
Yeah, I think having like faculty and mentors that you feel like you're able to be transparent with, and like who will support you, I think is really important. And if you can get it, like I definitely think like lean on that support system. Wayne, could you also answer the same question?
Oh yeah. Well, so kind of thinking back to the first term, what really stood out to me initially was, well, first was how much I didn't realize how much this school cared about football. And actually I should say the state cares about football. That was kind of absurd. The first big cultural shock. But then realistically, when I got into the classes, I mean, and the program, the difference between undergrad really started to hit me, because we go from I was doing undergrad research, but undergrad research for me at least was more sporadic. To I was jumping in a research lab where I was consistently working on top of your classes for various research projects. So I'm spending all my time doing research, which meant a number of obstacles kind of I faced with that in terms of stuff was even just timing. I'm actually typically a pretty scheduled person. I like to keep myself busy, so I just go from one to the other to the other. Except for the issue is I'd get really engaged in the research and I'd forget that I'd have a class, or I'd have a class and then I'd be stuck on like homework and stuff when I still needed to be doing some of this research. And the issue was, for me at least, none of this was actually like laid out like for especially research. It was just goal oriented, not necessarily time oriented. It's not like I have to be there at 10 and leave at 2. I can have a schedule where I'm there at 5 p.m. and stay till midnight, except for we need to get things done. And so that was kind of one of those obstacles or changes I really faced as that first year in school, was adjusting to that kind of schedule. The classes, for the most part, were about the same. They get a little bit harder, but that's all the same to me. But it's really that change in dynamic that stood out to me the most.
Yeah, I think definitely like having to structure your own schedule and balancing research and class can definitely be something that's hard to tackle at first. Um, but yeah, you did it though. That's really cool. For this next question, we're going to start with Evelyn. Please describe your experience with imposter syndrome and how you managed or overcame it.
So when I started my master's program, I definitely didn't expect the imposter syndrome to hit me so quickly and so hard. As quickly as orientation, when I came to orientation at UC Riverside, everybody was introducing themselves, and everybody in my cohort, so there's only 10 of us admitted to the master's program at a time. About 6 of them came from UC Riverside undergrad. The others came from UCLA, USC, and like from a private university. So from a Cal State, it was just me. And that was really intimidating for me because I felt like I couldn't connect with anybody, even though they were all super nice. It was just me, like I just couldn't connect with them because I felt like they were just so much better than me. And then when I started the program, imposter syndrome hit me a little bit harder because I went from doing 4 years of semester system to the quarter system in my master's program. And like I said, I take some classes with medical students, I take classes with PhD students and people who are doing thesis and like all these things. And it was just my first year. So that transition hit me really, really hard. Especially the quarter system, it's no joke. Like everybody says, quarter system goes by extremely, extremely quickly and you hit the ground running. So it seems like everybody around me was already used to the environment. They were used to the quarter system. They were used to the workload. I have to do research units for my master's program. And I was surrounded by PhD students. And I just feel like everybody knows what they're doing and I don't know what I'm doing. So that was really hard for me. And I would talk to my parents, but all they would tell me is just like, oh, just try your best. And that's all they could tell me. They just couldn't help me any more than that. And even though I'm appreciative of the support that they gave me, it just felt different to be in an environment that I wasn't used to. So one of the things I did to overcome it was to talk to my counselors. I have 2 different counselors here. I have one who helps me with manage my classes at UC Riverside and another one who helps me prepare for med school. So she's more of a pre-med counselor. I talked to both of them and I told them how I was feeling. And they both just helped ease my anxiety a lot. They just told me that like everybody goes through this, you're gonna adjust. I did end up having to drop one of my classes because I thought that I could do everything I did in undergrad in the master's program and I couldn't. And that's just something I had to come to terms with. And they helped me through it. Like, you're not the only person who does this. Everybody's going through it. Everybody's having a hard time. So hearing that reassurance from my counselors, because I saw them as like people who knew what they were doing, helped me a lot. And another thing that helped me was connecting with people in my cohort. I have one very close friend that I've met here, and she was also feeling the same thing. And both of us just came to each other and we're just like, what are we doing here? Like, we're so lost. There was a point where we got together just to walk around campus because we didn't know anyone around here. So I would always recommend, if you're feeling like you don't belong there, just know that they chose you for a reason. When you do start your master's program, know that you're there for a reason and just talk to people. There's always someone willing to help you. I connected a lot with the PhD student I'm working with in the research lab. I also told her, she comes from a similar background, so she helped me a lot too. So just talking to people, and I assure you, you're not the only one going through it.
Yeah, I think again, like forming that support system in college when you can, and remembering that they picked you for a reason, and you're gonna accomplish great things there is something that to always keep in mind when you're like going to like a new school and things like that. Jacqueline, could you also answer the same question?
Sure. I wish I could tell you that the imposter syndrome goes away as you navigate different levels, but it doesn't. Like, as someone who completed their undergrad at UCSD, there was 9% Latinx student population at the time. Like, it was a very lonely experience at UCSD, and so the imposter syndrome really like manifested in that way. As I went through my master's program, right, the imposter syndrome came back again, right? And even now at the doctorate level, I'm experiencing it all over again. But I can tell you what you do get really much better at is recognizing it and kind of like recognizing the negative self-talk and also like knowing when you need to reach out, right? Or talk to someone about it so that you're reassuring yourself that, you are supposed to be there, right? And what you're going through is a very normal student experience. And probably the rest of your cohort mates are probably experiencing the same thing, right? And so, it does get very nerve-wracking, you know, when you're at the level, for example, at the doctorates, like I'm working with executives, school principals. I mean, these are potential employers, right? Especially if we're thinking long-term about our career, like that adds another layer of pressure, right? And kind of performance, right? Feeling like I need to look like I know what I'm doing because these are potential people that I may work with or may want to hire me, right? And so there's definitely a lot of that. And so you know, I always tell folks, I mean, the same thing applies when you're applying for a job, right? You can get an interview, same with the program, right? You have an interview because you meet the qualifications. There's no doubt about that, right? So you all are applying or are in selective programs and you're there because you do meet the qualifications of these competitive programs, but it's about fit, right? And so you're there because they found that you were a good fit, right? Not because you were either qualified or not qualified. That's not even up to question at that point. It's really about fit. And so I remind myself whenever I'm having doubts, you know, that really those experiences are very common across most students. And the best way to demystify that is to talk to each other, right? When I'm feeling that way, I reach out to my colleagues and I tell them like, hey, I'm confused about this. You know what? I am too. And so that normalizes those feelings, right? And it really helps kind of help you manage when those negative feelings come up.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about how like sometimes like it might not go away, but like it's important to recognize it and reach out. I think that's super important, super helpful. For this next question, Wayne, we're going to start with you. What recommendations do you have for financing a graduate education?
So I actually have quite a bit of experience, at least coming from the research and or like PhD side of it. That may not necessarily be the case kind of for others taking like a master's program, although it can be very similar. So initially, how I started off was actually just applying. A number of universities have programs during the application process or deadlines during the application process to be considered for various financial awards. Not necessarily base. The difference will be a little bit is they won't necessarily base this off income anymore. A lot of times they're based off of merit. So this is part of that initial process, and so you're making sure making sure to apply to the right deadlines because I was really close to those a few times. But for those, you get things like fellowships or GRA, like graduate research assistants or GTAs, or kind of the structure. At least here at Ohio State, is very similar to that. I was fortunate enough to get a university fellowship that covered me for my first 2 years and a final dissertation year. As a whole. Beyond that, then you still have the same kind of scholarships that you did in undergrad, which I applied to those only really my first, I say my 4th year at Cal Poly Pomona, and there applied for the scholarships. Didn't really get any of them, but there's definitely still the scholarships available for some smaller awards, typically where fellowships will be your larger awards. There'll be things in the sciences. You have NSF, Hertz fellowships, and things like that that could help, that you could actually begin applying to in your undergrad. But don't necessarily get too stressed about it because all of those fellowships allow you to apply once you get into grad school and get a little bit more settled in, which is where I was fortunate enough to come in. Like I said, I came in with the university fellowship, but then I began applying for other fellowships, was where I received the NDSCG fellowship, which was another 3 years of funding. But then beyond that, in grad school, you get the opportunity to work as a GTA or as a GRA, where you're doing research as part of your job and getting paid for that. And they're helping most universities, to my knowledge, help pay for at least some of the school under those contracts. Here they pay for it all. I know can be a little bit different, depending on the university, but they pay for the school. So I've been again fortunate enough to not have to pay for the 5 years I've been here. But beyond that, there are other kind of options too. I mean, I've had plenty of friends who've gotten their master's programs funded through a job, or then paid for themselves this final year. Luckily, I'm a PhD candidate, but the final year I'll probably pay for myself because I'm going to go off and do some work elsewhere and finish up my dissertation through that time. So those are kind of the different avenues. There's quite a few. My recommendation, at least if you're interested in research or even teaching, a GRA or GTA does a lot to teach you various skills that will help you in academia. Like I said, I'm kind of in the academic route. So those come with useful skills that you'll build along the way, and then they come with the benefit of helping you finance your graduate education. So yeah, that's probably my biggest recommendations, or one of those two, but then fellowships kind of make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, that you were able to like have your time there financed. Jacqueline, I see that you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, for those of us who maybe aren't going the faculty research route, in terms of financing, I mean, if there's one thing being first gen and growing up, low income, you know how to hustle, right? And so one of the life hacks I like to tell students is one of the advantages of going straight from your undergrad to your master's programs. If you are within the CSU, and let's say you were eligible for grants while you were an undergraduate student, they do have grants at the master's level. And so I did not pay a single cent for my master's program. I just want to put it out there. So that is an option, an advantage of going straight from an undergrad to a master's program. You can get the CSU State University grant, and that'll pay completely for all tuition and fees, except for books, of course, and parking. So it is available. The other alternative is working at the CSU. I'm a CSU employee. I get tuition reimbursement. And so it is not 100% at the doctoral level, but I believe it is 100% at the master's level. So another avenue for you to consider in terms of finding employers that are willing to pay for your education. And there's also fellowships, right? As was already mentioned. So there are fellowships for those who are not necessarily going deeply into faculty and research positions. Those are still available for practitioners through professional organizations. For example, AERA is one of the big ones that offers some pretty significant sized fellowships.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't really know about funding for masters. I feel like mostly people talk about how like PhDs are funded. So that's really good information to have. And for our last question, we're going to start with Evelyn. What skills did you develop as an undergraduate student that have helped you succeed in grad school? How does the coursework differ from undergrad to grad school?
I think one of the things I would recommend doing as an undergrad to help you succeed in grad school, which is a skill I developed, is knowing how you study. I know everybody says like you need to learn how to study, but I don't mean like, oh, look up a video of like how to study or like any tutorials. You need to know yourself how you study. Everybody studies differently, and that's something nobody can teach you, in my opinion, because I always thought that just by taking notes in class and paying attention and like reading them again, that was studying for me. But I learned very quickly in undergrad that that's not how that worked for me. I kind of just fell flat on my face when I did that because I wasn't doing well. And I needed to learn that before I got to grad school because, like I said, grad school moved so much more quickly. And if I hadn't had that skill before, I know I would have done much worse in my first quarter, or just it would have taken me longer to adjust. For me, I learned that I was most successful whenever I repeated things like a million times. And repetition is just something that worked for me. It might not work for everybody, but for me, I learned that in undergrad, repetition worked really well for me. So in graduate school, when I started in my neuroscience class, there's a lot of things I had to memorize. And for me, memorizing it didn't mean just writing it over and over again. I had to draw everything I have to draw it. Right now in my biochemistry class, we have to learn like glycolysis and like gluconeogenesis, like all these processes. I have a huge whiteboard in my room and I just drew everything out step by step. I drew every single molecule, and just seeing it laid out, that's how I study. And that's something that you really need to learn before you go to graduate school, just so you could be a little more successful. The coursework is a lot heavier, in my opinion, not just because the classes are harder, but also because you're expected to do so much more on top of your classes. For example, I have to study for the MCAT. I'm taking my classes and I have to do research. On top of that, I have to study for the comprehensive exam that's coming up when I graduate. So there's a bunch of things that you have to do on top of your coursework. It might be less classes than you're taking in undergrad, but it's a lot more responsibility. And for example, for me, to a certain point, the professors don't really care what level you are. They will all treat you the same. So if you're taking a class that's full of PhD students, the professor is not going to care if it's your first year or if you're a master's student. They're going to treat everybody like a PhD student. And that's just something you have to adapt to. So just adaptability and knowing how you are most successful in studying yourself, I think that's something you should be able to know and understand in undergrad.
Yeah, I think that might be really intimidating at first too, to know that you're going to be treated like the same as PhD students when it's your first year, but definitely that's something that you're able to like learn how to navigate. Jacqueline, could you also answer the same question?
Sure. I mean, given that this is a RAMP program, I think it's appropriate to say that my biggest takeaway from my experience is read how you want to write. I have always found that very helpful in my writing in my graduate level courses. Find a scholar, a researcher that you really enjoy their writing style, and the best way is to really try to emulate that as possible, whether that's the way they write with clarity, how they write concisely. If that's something that really speaks to you, I always say find your style as a writer and really really keep reading. The reading will make you a stronger writer.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to use that. I have to pick up reading more and try to write like that. But definitely good advice. And that was our last question. So I'm going to ask panelists if they have any one-line closing remarks to leave students with, like a piece of advice and things like that. In the interest of time, I ask that we keep it to one sentence. But yeah, I'll open it up to the floor and whoever wants to start. Yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. But for sure that growth isn't linear. It goes up and down, and that everyone is living life for the first time. So it's okay to take your time.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else? Go ahead, Jane.
I would say my one-liner would be, you deserve to be here. You've earned a seat at the table. You've earned your right to be here.
I agree.
I would say that there's no admission mistakes. Just similar to what Jane is saying. There's no admission mistakes. You belong there, and you deserved your seat. You worked hard just like everyone else.
Anything else from our other panelists?
I'll share just again, seek mentorship in different ways, not just from your faculty, but also your cohort mates. Whenever you need some guidance, find those who you can lean against and really help you hold you up when you're not able to do that for yourself.
I guess I'll add one little thing is don't let fear stop you from applying, and don't let fear stop you from doing these things, because a lot of these things are scary and they'll continue to be scary. But I don't think fear should be one to stop you from at least trying. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I would also say, don't be afraid to try. Everything is intimidating and it seems intimidating, but I promise you when you get there, it's not that bad. You can get used to it, and just don't be afraid to try.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for those closing remarks. I think that was great. The advice given throughout the session was great. And now we're going to open it up to a quick Q&A. If anybody in the audience has any questions, you guys have questions for each other, that kind of thing, you guys can type it in the chat or you can just unmute.
Also, just wanted to recognize it is just a few minutes past 12:50. If you do have to leave, that's okay. We are still recording. Panelists, are you okay to stay on for the last 5 minutes to 1? Okay, thank you. All right, I think I have a question. Areli, I think you had mentioned the applying for in-state tuition. Is that only after 1 year? And it was called did you say witchy?
Yeah, so I think it's like with Oregon and Washington, it's more like on the West Coast states. There's some sort of like compromise with California and other out of state states. It's called witchy. You have to kind of look more into it and you qualify if you are like a California resident. But essentially what you would do is like you would apply as an out of state. So let's say if I applied to Washington, I would apply as an out of state, pay 1 year of out of state tuition, and then during my time there, I would work my way to be an in-state resident. And then whether they approve me, I'll be able to start paying in-state tuition, or if I decline, I can also. Well, I would have to continue paying out of state tuition. Something I will note was that I know when I went to admitted student stay at UC Davis, there was someone who came from Florida and was also talking about like getting their residency like kind of transferred. And so this would be like a similar process if someone from California was going to like a different state. You can always look into it. It doesn't have to be necessarily witchy, just seeing if the school accepts it, because it is different per state.
Thank you.
It's also probably worth reaching out to the universities, because I've actually found universities to be a lot more flexible than their stated rules will necessarily, or what you can find on the web. So it's definitely worth reaching out in the academic realm of things, talking to, like, if you have an advisor interested, talking to them can also be, because surprisingly, they'll do quite a bit for you to help you get you to a position that you feel comfortable going to a university. So that can help also.
Awesome, thanks. All right. Any other questions from our remaining participants? You can enter them into the chat if you'd like. If not, I just want to say thank you all again for joining us today, and a big thank you to all of the panelists. We really appreciate your support and sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing that, Arely.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.